This is Sarah Squires bringing you behind the headlines in today's edition of WyoToday Newsroom. Today, I am joined on the show by Game and Fish's Rene Schell. Now, Rene, I know that we have had a pretty wicked dry spell here, and sometimes that has impacts that maybe we don't even think about that have some real consequences out there in the field. And one of them has to do with staying on the road and what happens when you kind of neglect to follow that rule, and some new information that we've got about the impacts of that. What can you tell us about kind of all of these factors coming together?
Yeah. So even though I do feel like we've had this lovely monsoon-ish fall with a lot of afternoon showers, the growing season for most grasses and forbs has been over. And if folks can remember back even just a month or two ago, it was pretty dry this summer. We had a decent wet spring, and then it really dried up for quite a while. So I will focus on dewboys because I've got from our habitat biologist really specific information on dewboys, but I do want folks to be thinking of the broader picture of how this really applies everywhere. In Wyoming, we pretty much have dry summers. That's kind of what happens. And we've got great grass growth out there. Not too bad this time of year, although in dewboys we are about at half of the production of like maybe a normal year. And our habitat biologists and other folks help out too. The way they measure this, I think this is a really neat thing, is they actually go out and clip the grass. And so they do it every year about the same time, and so they can compare year to year. So they'll throw out like a hula hoop kind of into a random plot, and they'll do it for a certain distance. Let's just say it's 100 feet, and they'll do it every so many feet. They'll throw out this hula hoop, and then they'll clip all of the grasses within the hoop, and they'll bag them, and they'll weigh it. And that's how they start to get at extrapolating, taking that over the whole range of acres and knowing how much forage there is going to be for wildlife that winter and how much the habitat can support. So I just wanted to let people know, like, what seems like a very Zen thing, like trimming grass with scissors, but this is actually the way that we measure this. So in dewboys, we are down by at least half on the forage because it was such a dry summer up there, such a dry growing season. Then what is left in that grass has become dried out and brittle. So if we have folks, and then we see on top of that a lot of off-road tracks. And it's pretty hard to actually catch people, to be there in the moment to see someone driving off-road, because usually if somebody else is there, they're not going to do it, right? It's the whole, like, you should ethically act the same way as, when nobody's looking as if when somebody is looking. So just keep that, kind of keep that check in mind if you need to. But we see a lot of tracks going off-road. And I just saw one. I was just out elk hunting on opening day with my son and saw these tracks that went around this huge barricade that said no off-road travel, and it just kind of, it breaks my heart, really, because I do think that here in Wyoming, we value habitat for wildlife. Like, that is something that as Wyomingites, I know we value our wildlife, and I know we value habitat to support them. So it hurts me when I see that. But what I have for folks that I was excited to report on, only because it gives people a concrete, like, this is the impact I'm having if I choose to drive off-road, or if I see somebody driving off-road. This is why it's important for me to take a photograph and report them. So this is specifically up on Torrey Rim, and it's for bighorn sheep that use that area, and that is one of our wildlife habitat management areas that the Game and Fish purchased with a lot of federal money for wintering wildlife, particularly sheep, but also deer and elk. So that's the purpose of, like, why we have that acreage. So when we see just one off-road vehicle travel a mile worth of tracks, and it's maybe doesn't have to be a linear mile, right? It could be like an out and back or a crisscross around. But when there's 1 mile laid down of tracks over these grasses, it flattens the grasses. They don't bounce back up. They become then unavailable for wildlife. And that just took, that 1 mile of track took 3 weeks of food away from one sheep or one deer for the winter.
Wow.
You start adding, I know, it doesn't take too many tracks then to basically just remove food for an animal for the entire winter.
Wow.
You know? I thought, however, I know I really want folks to grab on to either whether it's like 21 days or 3 weeks, whatever it is for you, but that equates to that much forage loss for one animal over the winter. And that is significant.
Yeah.
So please, my plea is please stay on the roads. And sometimes it's hard to know because there's older 2 tracks that we're trying to close off. There's white arrows. So white arrows are what legally mark where you can travel in these places. So just know that. If you're going to make a turn and there's no white arrow, that is not a place you can go, even if it looks like 10 people traveled there before.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's my plea. Think about the wildlife in the winter and how many weeks they need to get through.
No kidding.
To make it.
Yeah, it's so hard, such a delicate balance here when we think about what we're hoping for in the wintertime. I mean, we want snowfall. We want snowpack in the mountain. We want to kind of beat our way out of this drought and to have a nice, healthy spring melt and all of these things. But, you think back a couple of years ago when we had maybe too many of our prayers answered, and we had so much snow that, of course, our wildlife were starving out there. So one way I like to look at it is, there are things that we can do to just sort of stay out of nature's way and not make things worse for our wildlife. So that is just fascinating research, Rene, and the way you guys went about kind of gathering the information that you needed to kind of calculate that out and see what the impacts were is so interesting. So I guess if you ever see game and fish out there with hula hoops, now you're going to know what they're up to.
Yep.
Yeah. So, well, as always, Rene, that is so handy for us to get kind of an inside look into the science and the research that you guys are doing to help us be better stewards of our beautiful outdoors here and the wildlife and habitat that we all kind of need to work to protect together. And so, sometimes we look at that, no off-road vehicle signs or, we look at some of these rules and think, that doesn't really mean very much, or it's not going to matter if I kind of bend the rules a little bit. But, we see behind the curtain to the science and the reasoning behind some of these regulations and why we all need to kind of chip in and work together to follow them and make sure that we're not getting in the way of having the healthiest wildlife populations and habitat that we possibly can out there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because I don't think people want to take the food out of wildlife's mouth. I think they really just honestly, and I didn't have these numbers even for me to understand, to put behind it. But it's like, it's not going to matter that much if I just, skirt around here real quick to retrieve my elk carcass and come back out. But I look at this and I go, oh no, it does really matter. That's 3 weeks. 3 weeks for an animal to eat this winter. So yeah, I hope folks are able to use that information and really affect change, whether it's within themselves or their friends or however that works. But we're hoping to make a difference.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Rene. Before we go, I want to put another plug in here. If you haven't heard about WyoToday's Big Bull Contest, we've got that going on right now. We've got categories for overall Big Bull, women's, men's, and youth. So if you wanted to throw your hat into the ring, we've got some amazing prizes out there. You can learn more about the contest at WyoToday.com. Thanks, as always, Rene, so much for joining us today and sharing the news with us.
Thanks, Sarah.